The panel discussion had already grown heated, but the real storm began when Stephen Miller leaned forward with his trademark smirk, eager to dominate the conversation. Every time Jasmine Crockett tried to make her point, Miller would cut her off, sharp, dismissive interruptions that drew uneasy chuckles from the crowd. One time, 2 times, 3, by the 6th interruption, it was no longer just debate. It looked like an orchestrated attempt to drown her out. Crockett, however, did not flinch. She sat there calmly, hands folded, waiting for him to run out of breath. Each time he tried to derail her, she simply smiled, her composure sharp enough to unsettle even Miller's confidence. Viewers at home noticed it. The live audience noticed it. Tension was building, not because she was losing control, but because everyone could feel she was waiting for her moment. On the 7th attempt, Miller tried again. He raised his voice, cutting across her words, attempting to claim the floor as if it were his alone. But this time Crockett leaned forward, locked eyes with him, and spoke in a tone so measured and powerful that the entire room fell into silence. "You've interrupted me 6 times, she said, "and not once have you managed to answer the question or defend your argument. If your only strategy is to silence me, then you've already admitted you have no substance to stand on." The effect was immediate. The audience erupted in applause. The moderator froze for a moment, caught off guard by the clarity of her words. And Miller, usually quick with comebacks, sat back in his chair visibly rattled. For the first time in the entire exchange, he had no response. He shifted uncomfortably, glanced at his notes, but said nothing. Crockett then finished her point, uninterrupted. Her voice carried the weight of reason and confidence, and the applause swelled again when she concluded. In that moment, it wasn't just about winning a debate. It was about proving that calm persistence and sharp truth can silence even the loudest voices in the room. Clips of that exchange spread across social media within hours. The highlight was clear: after being cut off 6 times, Jasmine Crockett's 7th remark didn't just silence Stephen Miller, it reminded everyone watching that respect and strength will always speak louder than interruptions. The moderator shifted uneasily in his chair, glancing between Miller and Crockett. The tension was almost visible, like static hanging in the air. Miller tried to smile, but it was forced, his usual rhythm broken. Crockett, on the other hand, leaned back in her seat with quiet confidence, as if she knew exactly what she was doing. The audience murmured, some nodding in approval, others whispering about how Miller had just been exposed. Cameras zoomed in on Crockett's calm expression, contrasting with Miller's twitch of frustration. He wasn't used to being checked, certainly not so directly, and certainly not in front of a national audience. When the moderator finally gave her the floor, Crockett's voice carried with steady authority. "Every time I try to present facts, I'm met with interruptions. That doesn't change the truth. It only shows fear of hearing it." The room broke into scattered applause again, louder than before. Miller adjusted his tie and glanced down at his notes, searching for a way to regain control. But Crockett had seized the momentum, and she wasn't letting go. Stephen Miller finally cleared his throat, trying to reassert himself. "Congresswoman, with all due respect," he began, but the audience chuckled knowingly. Everyone had just watched him interrupt 6 times, and the phrase sounded hollow. Crockett raised her eyebrows slightly, waiting. The silence pressed against Miller like a weight. He tried to launch into a rehearsed talking point, but his voice wavered, his timing off. It was clear, he had lost the rhythm of control. Then Crockett leaned forward, her tone sharper now, but still composed. "You see, Stephen, the difference between us is simple. You keep talking over people, while I prefer to talk to them. And right now, the American people are watching this exchange very closely. They can tell who's relying on interruptions, and who's relying on facts." The crowd erupted in applause, this time sustained and thunderous. Even the moderator couldn't hide a faint smile. Miller froze, caught on camera with no comeback strong enough to counter the blow. Crockett didn't just answer him, she framed the entire debate as a test of credibility. And in that moment, everyone knew who was winning. Miller's jaw tightened as the applause carried on longer than he expected. He tapped his pen against the table, visibly irritated, waiting for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he tried again, raising his voice with forced authority. "Facts," he scoffed. "The facts are on my side, and I won't sit here and be lectured." But Crockett lifted her hand, not rudely, but firmly enough to stop him mid-sentence. The room stilled. For the first time, Miller was the one being interrupted. "Stephen," she said calmly, her voice cutting through the tension, "you've had more time than anyone else tonight. Yet the only thing people will remember is how many times you tried to silence me. If you had stronger arguments, you wouldn't need to shout over mine." The audience roared with approval. Some even stood to clap, the energy spilling across the stage like a wave. Cameras caught Miller's strained smile as he tried to mask his frustration, but his silence told the truth. Crockett had turned his tactic against him, and now, the momentum of the entire debate was in her hands. The moderator, sensing the shift, quickly tried to regain control of the discussion. "Let's allow each speaker equal time," he said, his voice almost drowned out by the lingering applause. But everyone knew the moment belonged to Crockett now. She straightened in her chair, her eyes fixed on Miller. "Here's what the American people deserve," she began, her tone steady but commanding. "A conversation where voices aren't drowned out by volume, but where solutions are measured by substance." Her words landed with precision. The audience grew quiet again, not out of discomfort, but because they were hanging on to every syllable. Even the cameras framed her in a powerful shot, her posture confident, her delivery unshaken. Miller shifted uneasily, his usual sharp rebuttals nowhere to be found. Instead of dominating, he now looked cornered, boxed in by his own tactics turned against him. The contrast between the two couldn't have been clearer, one man flustered, one woman composed. And in that silence, Crockett pressed forward, knowing she had the upper hand. Miller finally leaned toward his microphone, desperate to reclaim some ground. "This isn't about me, Congresswoman," he said quickly, his tone sharper now. "This is about policy, about the direction of this country." Crockett didn't blink. She let him finish this time, her expression cool and unbothered. When he was done, she paused deliberately, long enough that the silence itself became part of her reply. "Exactly," she said softly, her voice carrying weight without needing volume. "It's about the direction of this country. And the direction doesn't improve when leaders shout each other down instead of listening. People don't need more noise, Stephen. They need answers." The audience erupted again, this time with a mix of applause and cheers. Viewers at home could see the difference, the calm, commanding presence of a leader against the restless interruptions of a man scrambling to regain footing. Miller pursed his lips, but said nothing. Crockett's remark had landed like a hammer, and the audience's reaction only drove it deeper. The moderator leaned forward, almost relieved that Crockett had taken control of the atmosphere. "Congresswoman, please continue," he said, gesturing for her to expand. Crockett nodded graciously and leaned into her microphone. "The people watching tonight don't want to see us fight for airtime. They want clarity. They want leaders who understand their struggles, not politicians who treat debates like a game of who can talk the loudest." The audience responded with another wave of applause. The cameras panned across faces in the crowd, people nodding, whispering to each other, clearly struck by her composure. Miller, meanwhile, sat stiffly, his arms crossed, eyes darting as though searching for a lifeline. Every interruption he had thrown at her earlier now hung over him like a shadow. What was meant to weaken her had instead exposed his own weakness. And Crockett, sensing his discomfort, pressed forward with even greater confidence. If the only strategy is to silence women, silence leaders, silence truth, then the people watching can see exactly who's afraid of real answers. The audience exploded with cheers, louder than any moment before. Miller's silence had now become the headline. The moderator struggled to calm the crowd, tapping his pen against the desk. "Please, let's give both sides a chance," he said, but his voice barely registered. The momentum had shifted entirely, everyone could feel it. Miller finally leaned toward his mic, forcing a thin smile. "Congresswoman, I'm not afraid of answers," he said, his tone tight. "I'm afraid of politicians who talk in circles while America suffers." It was an attempt to strike back, but Crockett didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, studying him as though she were about to dissect his statement piece by piece. "Talking in circles," she replied evenly. "Stephen, the only circles tonight are the ones you've been running around to avoid direct answers. If you want to speak about suffering, then let's start with solutions, not interruptions." The audience roared with laughter and applause. Even a few journalists seated near the stage were caught smiling, typing furiously into their laptops. Miller's forced smile faltered. He had tried to claw back control, but Crockett had turned his words into another weapon against him. The pressure on him was undeniable, and the cameras caught every flicker of frustration. Miller's hand clenched around his pen as if he could squeeze composure back into himself. He leaned in, raising his voice again, but the edge of desperation was clear. "You think clever lines fix this country? You think applause changes reality?" Crockett didn't miss a beat. She leaned forward too, her eyes narrowing just enough to show she was no longer simply responding, she was striking. "No," she said firmly. "Clever lines don't fix this country. But listening does. Respect does. Leadership does. And if the best you can offer America is 6 interruptions and 0 answers, then maybe the applause isn't for me, it's for the truth you've been avoiding." The crowd erupted once again, louder than before. Some even rose to their feet, clapping and cheering as Miller sank back into his chair. The moderator, overwhelmed, finally let the moment play out, knowing it was pointless to try and cut it short. For the 7th time, Crockett's words had landed, this time not just silencing Miller, but redefining the debate entirely. The camera zoomed in on Miller's face, catching the tight jaw and the flicker of frustration in his eyes. He opened his mouth to speak but quickly shut it again, realizing anything he said now would only fuel Crockett's momentum. The moderator finally turned to her with a small nod. "Congresswoman, you have the floor." Crockett straightened her posture, her voice calm but commanding. "This isn't about who can shout the loudest. It's about who can lead the clearest. Every time I've been interrupted tonight, people watching at home have seen exactly what's wrong with our politics: too much noise, not enough answers." The audience burst into applause again, this time sustained, echoing through the hall. Social media feeds lit up instantly as clips began to circulate, Crockett holding her ground, Miller visibly silenced. For the first time in the debate, the entire room seemed to revolve around her words. The interruptions had backfired spectacularly, transforming what was supposed to be Miller's tactic into Crockett's greatest strength. And in that moment, everyone watching knew, this exchange would be replayed for days to come. By now, the atmosphere in the studio had completely shifted. The audience leaned forward in their seats, hanging on to Crockett's every word. Even the moderator seemed to sense that history was unfolding right in front of them. Miller, however, looked cornered. His usual confidence had evaporated, replaced with a forced half-smile that fooled no one. He scribbled something in his notes, but his pen tapped nervously against the desk, giving away his unease. Crockett pressed on, her tone steady but unwavering. "We cannot solve problems by silencing each other. We solve them by facing hard truths head-on. If one person in this room can't handle that, then perhaps it says more about their position than it does about mine." The audience erupted once more, some rising to their feet in applause. The sound of clapping echoed so loudly it momentarily drowned out the microphones. Miller shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the moderator, but no help was coming. Crockett had turned the debate into a masterclass on composure, and the longer Miller stayed quiet, the more obvious her victory became. The moderator attempted to pivot, desperate to restore balance. "Let's move to the next question," he said, but the audience wasn't ready to let go. Their applause for Crockett rolled on, drowning out his words. The cameras captured it all, her calm smile, Miller's forced expression, and the undeniable energy in the room. When the noise finally settled, Miller tried to interject again, his voice tight. "Congresswoman, you can grandstand all you want, but people care about results, not speeches." Crockett leaned in, her voice sharp but measured. "Results? Stephen, results don't come from interruptions. They come from vision. They come from listening, from compromise, from leadership. If your strategy tonight is a preview of your idea of results, then no wonder people are frustrated." The crowd's reaction was electric, cheers, applause, even laughter rippling through the hall. Viewers at home could sense the imbalance. Miller's words fell flat, while Crockett's replies kept gaining strength. At that moment, it wasn't just a debate anymore. It was a public reckoning, one where the audience had already chosen who carried authority. Miller shifted in his seat, visibly rattled. He tried to regain composure, straightening his tie and forcing another smirk, but the cameras betrayed him. Viewers could see the discomfort behind his eyes. Crockett, however, leaned back with ease, as if she had anticipated this very moment from the start. "You see," she said, her voice resonating clearly, "respect isn't weakness. It's strength. And when someone spends more time cutting people off than answering directly, the public notices. They always notice." The audience broke into thunderous applause yet again, some even chanting her name. It was no longer a debate, it was a demonstration of power, where interruptions had turned into stepping stones for Crockett's rise in the moment. Miller glanced at the moderator, clearly hoping for a lifeline, but none came. The moderator, like the audience, was captivated by the way Crockett commanded the stage. Every second that passed in silence only amplified the impact of her words. Miller, once eager to dominate, now sat muted, ironically defeated by the very tactic he thought would give him control. The hall was electric, every eye fixed on the stage. Stephen Miller, who had come into the debate confident and combative, now sat silent, his earlier interruptions replaying in the minds of everyone watching. What was meant to rattle Crockett had only solidified her presence. Crockett leaned forward one last time, her tone calm, steady, and final. "Tonight wasn't about me or Stephen, it was about showing the country what leadership looks like. Leadership isn't shouting. It isn't silencing. It's standing firm in truth, even when others try to drown it out." The crowd erupted into a standing ovation. The moderator's voice was almost lost in the roar of applause as he attempted to close out the segment. Clips of the moment would go viral within minutes, flooding timelines with captions like, "Jasmine Crockett shuts down Stephen Miller with one devastating remark." Miller forced a thin smile, but it was clear, the night had not gone his way. Crockett had taken every interruption and turned it into evidence of her strength. By the time the cameras cut, the debate's headline was already written. Stephen Miller cut off Jasmine Crockett 6 times, but her 7th remark silenced him instantly. And for everyone watching, that silence spoke louder than any words he could have mustered.